Hi, my name is Lindsay Mason, and I'll be discussing a case analysis today. This will be my second video observation analysis, and it is titled Child Support VRS. This situation is a VRS, Video Relaying Services call between three consumers. There's two female participants that are in their 50s. One is a deaf consumer, one is the interpreter. There is a attorney general who is a hearing male and in his late 40s, I believe. Another part of that, I had watched some interviews prior that were included on the DVD, and the attorney general is an interpreter himself as well, so I can discuss that later. The interpreter is only able to see the deaf consumer and only hear the attorney general. So that's the setup for a VRS call typically. And the attorney can only hear the interpreter. So the VRS call was initiated by the deaf consumer, and she had called the attorney general office to ask questions about child support. The deaf consumer is a grandmother who has custody of her two grandchildren, one female, one male, and she is calling to request child support that she had never received, maybe one payment, a very low payment a long time ago, and she's needing support to raise these children. The whole conversation was about 26 minutes long. The register was consultative, and it ended up that the attorney general asked most of the questions, but the deaf consumer did ask a lot of questions as well, just not as many, I believe. Some of the questions that they asked and discussed were information about the children, details, a lot of different details and addresses and phone numbers of the parents, their jobs, where they live, their involvement with their children, the support that the grandmother was requesting, the deaf consumer questions. She asked what kind of support, or to explain what kind of support she needed. She asked questions about the children and the parents as well. And she even talked about being worried that the parents would go to jail if they weren't paying child support, which goes along with her attitude and personality, which I'll discuss in environmental demands in a little bit. The interpreter facilitated the communication exchange. The personality, I'll discuss a little bit during my summary now as well. The attorney general, you can tell, was very confident and proud in his position and the state's stance on consumers receiving child support that they deserve and fighting really hard for that. It did appear that he was a little bit more outspoken and had that personality traits. The grandmother, the hearing consumer, seemed a little bit opposite of that. She was very sweet and kind-hearted, it appeared for me, and very genuine. She wasn't wanting to take any more support than she needed, just that she thought was fair. So she was, really proud of her, too proud to take more than what she deserved, but in a good way, not that she was bragging or being selfish or anything like that. But she was she stays at home as a caregiver for her grandchildren. The interpreter was very soft spoken, I noticed, and after reviewing the interview that was provided on the DVD, I noticed that she was also soft spoken in her regular tone of voice just during that interview conversation. And I was wondering, that was one of my questions, if that's one of her strategies that she uses during VRS calls or just interpreting in general. because it really, her soft-spoken voice, I believe, felt like a calming, relaxing conversation. And she did say that she is at times anxious or nervous, that she's not having that connection during VRS calls as compared to in-person calls. But it didn't appear that she had those anxieties until I talk about a demand about her microphone later that did cause some of her anxiety to occur or was visible to me. And I also thought her soft-spoken tone of voice really helped her show the emotion, since this is an emotional conversation, and since she had that soft spoken, she could show the emotion of the grandmother being wanting the support, but also being very empathizing with the parents as well. And then it really was able to show the personality of the attorney general as well. My main demand that I will discuss today is when the microphone headset interfered, with the signing space. The control that the interpreter took was she moved the headset microphone back up to her mouth. Some of the concurrent demands that I had noticed is that time, it was closer to the end of the conversation, so many important details were being discussed. Addresses, the list of different paperwork that would be needed for the next appointment dates and times. And it also was noticeable that there was a cord to the headset and it was plugged in. So I thought that might be making it pull tight if it didn't have enough slack. And so maybe that was causing it. It had happened 1 minute prior to this incident. The microphone was hit by her signing space and her signs, and she had to move it down about 1 minute before this incident happened. So you could tell that there was some readjusting needing to happen. A positive consequence is the Attorney General received the message and didn't miss important details and information. A couple negative consequences is it was visible to the deaf consumer her adjusting the microphone. It interrupted the flow a little bit and appeared to cause some frustration with the interpreter right after that. Resulting demand, it did cause a brief pause that occurred in the conversation directly after the adjustment was made. Paralystic resulting demand, it appeared that the interpreter was flustered right after the adjustment as well. Some alternate control options and their effectiveness I will discuss next. Some pre-assignment control options. The interpreter could adjust the microphone beforehand, test it out. You can test it, at the beginning of your shift, but I think in between each call, if possible, just a quick adjustment and tighten it. I don't know if that's a possibility. Asking her company suggestions or solutions, what other VRS interpreters have used in their experience. I've also seen now currently some sturdier, bigger headphones with the bigger headphones included and the microphone. It didn't appear that they were actually headphones, that it was just the headpiece with the microphone. And I know maybe that wasn't possible back in when this video was made. Some during assignment controls, she could have not adjusted it and just left it. Leave the microphone right where it was, and some positive consequences to that would be that didn't interrupt the flow. It wasn't visible, but I don't believe that's as effective because of the fact that there was important details, and it's important that the Attorney General receive that information. The interpreter could have asked for a moment while she adjusts the headpiece thoroughly, especially since the concurrent demand that it already happened once a minute prior to that, so you could tell that there was some adjustments and maybe loosening of the microphone that was happening towards the end of the call. She could have asked the attorney if he had heard the last utterance she had said. she could have just clarified to make sure that he received that information. But it did appear that he had received the information. So I don't think that would be as effective. But not, I think what her control choice, I believe, was the most effective, that she adjusted it and continued on with the interpretation. Some post control options. She could have adjusted the headpiece after the call to make sure it was secure for the next interpretation. Brainstorm more solutions, maybe a smaller microphone, maybe a sturdier one if they had those bigger ones that had the headphones included. I doubt they had the Bluetooth possibility to use Bluetooth headphones. I'm not sure that works with the microphone, but I don't think they would have those electronic devices back when this video was made again. Ask other interpreters. Because of the interview knowledge that I received that was included on this video, I thought some post-control options would be, she had mentioned that she was really tense in VRS calls, and interpreters get that way anywhere, a lot of strain on the neck and the shoulders and the wrists. So I thought a good control choice would be to receive a massage to reduce that tenseness that she mentioned in the interview prior. For the most part, I think all these control options could be effective, except for leaving the microphone down and not adjusting it at all. Asking for a moment, or if the attorney heard, would prolong the interpretation, but it's important that the information be relayed. So I think those could be effective as well. They were more on the liberal side, and which is okay. And when those details need to be relayed, that's okay. I do think her control choice was more liberal, but as far as the concurrent demands and reading those back channeling cues, which is, I know, harder, and she did mention that, the body language, since you couldn't hear couldn't see the Attorney General, but through his next questions, and it appeared that he did understand and hear everything. Pre and post controls, I think, are almost always effective that I listed here. Overall demands that I had found, identified a lot of demands. I didn't believe that there were a lot, mostly not as significant or demanding, which I know is okay. The demands that were smaller, and a few that were more significant. So that's what I discussed and will list here. The environmental demands that I noticed, the participants involved, the terms being used like garnished wages, back child support, court ordered, which again could be some pre-assignment controls looking up those terms. Although from the interview, I did understand that she has a lot of experience in these phone calls and this type of interaction dealing with child support and attorney generals and things like that. All the participants and consumers were sitting during the interpretation. The the attorney general had paperwork and a calendar in front of him. The deaf consumer had a side table and was able to take notes later in the conversation. The interpreter wore black and a solid blue background, and she wore the microphone headpiece. Some parallelistic demands, it appeared that she couldn't hear always, and she would lead into the camera a little bit, and that is also what I learned from her interview, that she would rather interpret in person because of the human connection being decreased and not able to read those facial expressions of the hearing caller and that body language. So she mentioned that she leans into the camera, and I know I have done that too, not that you would receive more information, but maybe you could see, the deaf consumer better. But it's just a common thing that I've seen myself use, and she did mention that also. So that maybe she was having trouble hearing the message coming in from the Attorney General. Some intrapersonal demands, I believe it's an semi-emotional conversation to have. I know she has experience with this kind of conversation, so it might not have affected her as much, but I do think hearing, that the grandmother not wanting them to go to jail, and I can, for me personally, relate to that, and that was really relayed in the information that the grandmother said as well. So another interpersonal demand, it did appear that the interpreter was flustered after the microphone fell twice and with the turn-taking interruptions, which I'll discuss now, because I did notice another main large significant demand of the turn-taking and managing turn-taking and overlap talking. I noticed that the attorney and deaf consumer were talking a lot at the same time, and I believe that's common in VRS. We did a lot of VRS calls this summer, and with different deaf consumers and other interpreters that would come and be the hearing consumer. And I know from my practicing for my first couple calls that I've ever done, the overlap talking would happen and it would cause frustration. And so I did move into more of a CI interpreting style, but I did receive feedback from a deaf consumer that that's kind of frustrating for deaf consumers because they have to wait and to try to be more SI, but still managing those turn taking. Just a quick response to her interpreter excuse me, excuse me, interpersonal demand of the overlap talking. I believe the interpreter did a good job, her work, in relaying that turn taking overlap talking and showing that, which I hadn't seen that too much before. So that was good that it's a real conversation. That's what happens in any phone call conversation that can happen. But I did notice a negative consequence that she did omit a few information points. He said get some child support coming in. She omitted. Maybe that wasn't as pertinent information. The interpreter missed that the attorney general really takes pride in their state and helping and supporting people that are deserve child support. And luckily the attorney general did repeat that because I think that's important information. And so the interpreter was able to relay that information. And I'm not sure if I asked a lot of these questions in my question section that I will be providing as a document later, that I'm not sure if those were conscious decisions of omitting the information or if that she missed them because of the overlap talking. So I'm not sure if they were conscious or unconscious omissions of the interpretation. There was a slight miscommunication, and I'm not sure where the fallout was, but the interpreter interpreted something and the deaf consumer actually corrected the information. So that was another interpersonal demand that I noticed. The deaf consumer stated the name of her son's job in New York, and it seemed like the interpreter was kind of confused just through her facial expressions. So the deaf consumer repeated it several times and finger spelled it repeatedly to get that information clear, as it's very important that they can contact his work to receive that child support. And the interpreter did ask for clarification from the deaf consumer to clarify that the name of his business that he worked for. Another interpersonal demand is that I noticed that every time the interpreter signed address, I noticed that sign made the microphone become louder and a little bit of a disruption. So the conclusion to my case analysis is that the process that I took for this, I believe, was effective because I did take the time to watch the interviews. It was somewhat time consuming to watch the interviews of the attorney general and of the grandmother, or the interpreter, excuse me. And I found some great information in there, and it really swayed my questions, as I had a lot of questions that were similar to what they were discussing. And so I was able to take that information and dig deeper into asking more detailed questions, which is really effective, I believe. So I watched the interviews of the consumers first, then I viewed the videos and the video of the interpretation. And what happened actually is that I had watched the first 9 minutes on one day, took all my notes, and then the next day I went to go watch the rest. And I had lost my notes to the first 9 minutes. So I did get to watch the first 9 minutes again, so that was helpful. And then review it straight through. And then I went back several times to find my notes that I had taken with the timestamps to look at those parts more closely. I then created the DC VRS and demand constellation, and then I just pulled everything together to create this case analysis. I really enjoy these case analysis and the opportunity to make a video about it, just add some more detail that I really like to include that can't always be documented in 3 or 4 pages. So I really enjoy this option to do a video and just have the opportunity to talk about interpreting work that is effective and non-judgmental. And again, I'll be submitting my many questions through a document, including this video link as well. Thank you.